Good morning and welcome to today's edition to Tip Off. Hope you guys are doing great. Obviously, an amazing night last night with the American troops getting into the compound of Osama bin Laden and killing evil being number one for the United States of America. So, obviously, tip of the hat. Any of you that have spent any time in the service, any of you whose any family members have, obviously, this is a very proud day for you, and one in which you should feel that great pride for what you have done, what members of your family have committed to, and the troops, and those obviously amazing individuals that pulled off this. Could you imagine being on that mission, obviously knowing what that mission was, knowing there probably can't be a more hostile environment to pop into at that moment? Uh, really, just proud day for American troops. I don't think it's the end of Al Qaeda, but hopefully it allows us as Americans to gain some of our pride. I don't think there's any question for those of us that in our generation, 40 years old, this was the first. We missed most of Vietnam. We were too young. We obviously didn't experience any of the other things. This was the first kind of moment in America where we get some pride out of this, that we completed the job and got it done. So, tip of the hat to all those who, in any way, shape, or form, had anything to do with it. And so I really feel honored to be a part of a country that has those people, as I'm sure you do today. Had to mention that to tip off today. Hope you're well. I'll try to get a European scouting report done this week for you. The big thing, sports-wise, to touch on as the weekend of the NFL draft is done, and it's going to be this draft maybe as much as any I've seen. It's going to be just fascinating to see how it plays out in the future. Which of these quarterbacks is going to be the right one? Trent Dilfer's killing the Seahawks for not taking Andy Dalton. He might be right. Uh, he might be wrong too. Mel Kiper annihilated Indianapolis for not taking Trent Dilfer, ironically, and not the last time somebody butchered somebody on draft day, probably, and Trent Dilfer didn't turn out to be all that fabulous. But I think more than anything, it's going to be interesting to see just long term these quarterbacks, which pan out, which don't. We're at an evolutionary stage in how the game is being played on the collegiate as well as the pro level, with much more shotgun, entirely huge amount of spread on the collegiate game, and which of these translate, which of these don't. Does Kaepernick somehow translate, but a Newton doesn't? Does a Dalton translate, but a Mallet doesn't? I think it's going to be that's going to be the most interesting thing. And the real sad thing is for all of these guys and a lot of them who make the NFL. I think Adam Schefter pointed out how many of them are in the Pro Bowl were undrafted players who now can't sign because the lockout's back in. The University of Utah, BYU and Utah State all have a tremendous of those because I believe only 3 local players were drafted. Congratulations to Brandon Burton and Curtis Marsh and Caleb Schlotterhoff. That might be the last time I have to say Schlotterhoff, because they got drafted, but these other guys now are undrafted and in a lockout, unable to sign. So I think that's going to be that's just really disappointing because I think that restricts what they're able to do. And then all these young quarterbacks we just talked about are going to be at a huge disadvantage because of the fact they don't get any early training camps and optional workouts, which aren't optional, and all of those items along the way. So we'll keep an eye on that. NBA-wise, Memphis obviously gets Oklahoma City last night. The thing that jumps out to me more than anything else on the Memphis-Oklahoma City and just Memphis overall is length. This has kind of been the theme of our offseason as Jazz fans, and we continue to talk about it. But you're just not seeing very many undersized guys. You'll see rosters go small at times, but you're not seeing undersized guys in key moments. Miami does a little bit. LeBron will play some 4, but LeBron's 6'9", 245, and so that's not really undersized. Even Boston's not going undersized when they have Jermaine O'Neal and Kevin Garnett out on the floor, and they played, Big Baby's undersized, and Big Baby's getting abused a lot of the time. But you just watch Memphis right now, what they're doing. They're doing some interesting things because they're proving that you can win without the 3. They really can't shoot very well, but they're so good defensively. They get a bunch of offensive possessions in transition. They complete a great deal of them, and then they just pound it down low to Zach Randolph. I am just so curious to whether or not Zach Randolph can be the model for Al Jefferson and the Utah Jazz. Is there any way in which this is what Al can do in the future, can he evolve? He's a few years younger than Zach. He's had a similar career playing in a lot of losing teams. He hasn't had the tumultuous, poor behavior that Zach Randolph had, but is this something where we can look at with Al Jefferson and hope that this is where he goes to? We certainly can hope. Now, is there any credibility to it that he can become a more efficient player over time, that he can understand the game? He's a low post scorer, and that's really what Zach was. But Zach, for a long time, was a guy who gave you 20, gave up 25, and that's what the book on Al has always been. They put Marc Gasol next to Zach, and he's become a better defensive player because he has that stable force next to him, and he's just a fabulous, fabulous offensive player. And you just wonder whether Al Jefferson can evolve into that. Derek Favors takes the Marc Gasol role, and then we get right back to where does Paul Millsap fit in, and it gets into the undersized issue again. You just simply cannot be undersized as a primary starting player in this league. You just look around these playoffs. You just don't see it very often. And when you do, it's only in unique lineups where guys are going small or something of that sort. Greg Miller spent some time on Sports Beat with Tom Kirkland this week, and he was. There were a bunch of comments in there. I thought he was very straightforward. I thought he was very honest. But the key to me is he just continually talked about the team being competitive. There was never one mention along the way of the team rebuilding next year, going down to the bottom to work its way up, which is very consistent and admirable about what this organization has stood for. They have never once decided that they were going to go lose for 2 or 3 years to be able to build their way up. It's a difficult model to try to maintain that level of competitiveness. Very few, if any, teams have done it to the level the Utah Jazz have. But it's clear that continues to be the model that Greg is talking about, that Kevin O'Connor is trying to live by. And that's one of the great questions of this offseason when the lockout comes to an end, or if hopefully it never happens, of what their approach is going to be. He talked a great deal about their flexibility that they'll have financially. He talked about their young players, but there certainly is a quest on this to become maintain themselves as a competitive franchise rather than acquiring assets to build to the future. We can talk about it more. Hope you guys are well. And again, tip of the hat to the United States of America troops. Anyone who's been involved in any way, and really if we have any of the wives out there who's maintain the home front while, or husbands who maintain the home front while the wives or husbands are out fighting the war. Those are the heroes that I think get little credit for what they do and their sacrifices. They raise the families, worrying every single day what might happen next. So fabulous day for the United States of America. 10 years in the waiting. And tip of the hat to the troops of the United States of America.